Good evening, everybody. This is Tony Hain Shipkowski for ACTE 630.58 with Dr. Dreon. I just wanted to quick go over my second article from my classes that I use for teaching and especially for review. This is a study guide for the chapter I just finished up about a week and a half ago. It's also going over the stuff that I posted on my first video reviewing my notebook project for presenting a lesson to the kids. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. It's not going to take me too terribly long. I think a Word document is kind of more simple for what we're trying to do here and assess for workability with students with learning disabilities. So I'm just going to go quickly through this and just kind of touch on a lot of the UDL standards that we've talked about and a couple web accessibility standards as well. So just to start it off real quick, UDL standard 1.1 talks about the ability for a document to be posted as a workable document where we can change the color, enlarge it, and so on and so forth. And even though I don't have that ability right now here, if a student would have a physical handicap where they can't see very well, whether it be due to color contrast or poor eyesight, they can easily download this document off of what we use here at school called Schoology, and then they could enlarge it themselves. I can allow them to do that through, the different features of their iPads. The second standard for UDL that it talks about is the use of visuals. As you can see, this chapter really talks about graphing and taking information from graphs. Some of the problems don't have any, but the problems are there, and I guess we could count those as visuals, but I'm really just focusing on the graphs here. This is open-ended questions that the kids are going to see on their tests that they had, and I go through them almost word for word for the open-ended. For the rest of the problems, I change just some of the numbers, so the math's still the same, but the numbers are different. So again, this is a visual kind of concept that I like to use, and that also touches on the UDL standard 2.5 of visuals to display concepts. We're talking about graphing here, so what better way to talk about graphing than using the visuals of graphs and displaying data or having to graph the information itself. The pcc.edu web accessibility guidelines also talk about Word documents and in terms of the use of visuals. And it says here for math and science to use the math plugin, whether it's on Microsoft Office or some other type of program, that the kids can plug in an equation, or I could plug in an equation and post it for them. Which for this information I really don't have to do that, but the ability is there for them to do so. Another UDL standard is a graphic organizer to highlight importance. I usually allow my students, at least for doing the study guide, I allow them to use the checklist that I talked about in my last video to use them on this review, or even with some of my students with disabilities, I allow them to use the checklists and the graphic organizers that we designed in class on their tests, just an added support, because some of the stuff is confusing, and if I can help them by allowing them to use that, then I'll do that. UDL standard 3.3 talks about explicit prompts or step-by-step. Again, going back to those checklists that I talked about in my first video, allowing the students to use those here as well. I think that again helps them remember the steps. It helps them find if they got something wrong, or a simple way of just reminding them what needs to be done first, second, third, fourth, and so on. This is definitely follows along UDL standard 3.4, an opportunity to revisit. This is a study guide based solely off of their homeworks, which are based off of their notes, which comes from the PD website. So again, this is an opportunity to revisit, an opportunity to figure out what they've done wrong in the past and fix that before their test the next day. Which I like I said before, I take the problems from the test, and all I do is I change the numbers, maybe change a negative to a positive, that kind of thing, and just have them do the normal steps that they're going to do tomorrow on their test. UDL standard 5.1 talks about solving problems using a variety of strategies. Again, my list that they follow, but they don't have to follow it step by step all the time. They can use it to the point where they need to use it, or adapt it to the way that it fits them best, and following and finding the rules for them to do the best work that they can do. UDL standard 5.3 talks about different approaches and strategies. Again, like I just said with 5.1, very similar. 7.3 for the UDL standards talks about class or team. Every chapter I do a study guide. Every day before the test, I do a study guide based solely off of what they'll see and allow them to work with it. And I've noticed that when I allow the students to work with it more than me reviewing and them reviewing with each other or with me at the board, it really has helped them in the past. The last two standards I'm going to quickly talk about here are UDL standards 8.2, differentiating difficulty. Again, if students are struggling with some of these concepts, I can go back and highlight some of them, especially some of the common misconceptions from homeworks. I can highlight those during this. I can also make these problems a little more simple and say, okay, here's what we do first. Now what's the next step? Or if they struggle with the first step or second step, I can further help with any of the students, whether regardless of learning disability or not. UDL standard 8.4, the students can show how they're right. They can follow that step-by-step process that works for them or mine that we discussed in class and came up with together as a group. They can use that step-by-step process to show they're right or to help them figure out where they made the mistake. And at this point, when I'm on the study guides, I really hope they can find their own mistakes and correct their own mistakes on their own based off of what we've done in class. Because like I mentioned before, the tests come from the homeworks, which come from the notes. And if we're following the same strategies the whole way through, perfect opportunity for the students to find out where they got it wrong and how they got it wrong, which then also shows mastery-oriented feedback. If they can find it themselves, that's what we want to see as teachers. We want to see any student, regardless of ability, find the point where they made the mistake. This is, again, a review that I use, a study guide. One of the things I would love to learn how to do is some of the standards that talked about, with these graphics, clicking on them and then maybe adding word text, unless I read it wrong. That's something I'd definitely be interested to find. So when a student with a visual impairment can click on it and figure out what it's saying, or ask or find out what they need to do. So again, I hope you guys enjoyed my two videos, and these are just two examples of many things that I do in my classroom and use for some supplementation or help for students that need extra work. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.